We are Michael Wood, a Ph.D. in police management and former sergeant with the Baltimore Police Department, and Ty Tate, a regular person like most of you, trying to make sense of the world we all live in. A world where what you don't know can hurt you. This is Wood and T on the POV.
Oh, yeah, this will be fun. All right. Officer Friendly is ready for 4. All right, my friend.
Wait till you see my thumbnail for this one. Oh, it's so good.
I'm very excited to see the finished product here. All right. So let's talk militarized police. Why do police have armored vehicles and tanks to, I don't know, pull over people and write tickets and, I don't know, do domestic arrests and, you know, basic stuff? We're not talking the SWAT team, just regular police.
Right, sure. So there are, let's just say, you know, there are going to be things that I don't know, but it's widely accepted that there are 2 main catalysts for the militarization of police. And this was one that, when we talk about the Google Trends, let's talk about where that shows. So when people got interested in militarized police is one subject. When it actually happened is another subject. And then how it was exacerbated is the third level of this. I feel like on a personal level, a lot of it is glorified and very opinionated about militarization of police or military experience for police. So I've often argued I like the idea of cops that come from the military, but I don't like the idea of militarization of those cops. And that's just my pure opinion. And then it seems like other people will think that cops come in okay, and then this militarization environment corrupts them and makes them more aggressive. I'm not really sure. I don't know if we've been around long enough for us to see that. But then, like, what do people mean by weapons of war? And which is what they say. They're militarized. And I do want to point out that the vast majority of what we see as militarized police is just armored vehicles. It's not tanks, you know, with their whatever, I don't know, 100 millimeter cannon, you know, bombs that they're using on them. They're not using artillery on people. Even if they have a tank, they're only using it for an armored personnel vehicle. So, I mean, would we be happier if they were driving in armored Escalades? That doesn't make much sense to me. So I think we have to really narrow down what happened, you know, what we're doing with the whole topic. But so let's get how this started. Well, for one, we kind of have a constitutional mandate, and that's the Second Amendment, which means that the citizenry kind of has this right to be armed well enough to be able to fend off the police department, so the state, you know, the government. The first line of government is going to be police. So you're obviously going to have this thing where police can't lose. Society is also determined, whether legally or just in mythology, that police cannot lose, right? So that was one of my big issues that I've realized at one point in time, is that things were really unsafe when I had this mentality that I couldn't lose. So when I had that young rookie mentality, I would run into an alley chasing a guy with a gun when 2 o'clock in the morning and it's completely dark. Well, that was dumb, right? So as I got a little bit more time on, when some kid ran into an alley at 2 o'clock in the morning with a gun, well, I just stopped and walked back in my car and said, fuck that. You know, it's not, I can lose. I'll catch him later. I know who he is. I'll wait till next time that I have the tactical advantage. What's that?
You got smarter.
Yeah, we could say I got smarter. I think so by far. And that's one of my main objections with things like warrants and raiding houses. I don't understand why we're doing it a lot of the times, because we can just wait and catch that person at a way more opportune time that isn't in their house at 4 a.m. in the morning when they're not even thinking clearly. I understand the principles behind it, but I mean, if you raid my house at 4 in the afternoon by coming and knocking into the door, things are probably going to go very smoothly. If you bust in my door at 4 o'clock in the morning when I'm half asleep, I don't know if that's going to go very well. I'm going to reach my weapon and try and do something. So obviously this doesn't make much sense. But when it comes to policing, this really came to fruition with the North Hollywood shootout. We can't show the video on our channel because YouTube's awesome like that, but anyone can go ahead and search the North Hollywood shootout. And what happened during this is two people went to rob a bank. And then when they came out, they were engaged by patrol officers in LAPD. And obviously other people responded, sheriff's department and stuff. But when they started this battle in North Hollywood, the bank robbers were in level 3, maybe level 4 armor from head to toe. And they had the helmets on, and they had semi-automatics, M16s, AR-15s, and things like that. So they come out at this Hollywood. They're engaged by patrol officers in a patrol car with probably a 9mm. And that is not going to go well for the police officers. For quite a while in this shootout, you'll see it goes on for hours. The first 20, maybe 30 cop cars that are there are completely devastated by two individuals. The cops that do get shots off and shoot them, the bullets, they're just getting hit left and right. These 9mm bullets aren't doing anything to them. So it took a long time for enough armor to get to these suspects to be able to shoot them and capture them. The essentially for an hour or so, the entire LAPD was outgunned by two individuals who really didn't have much. They had body armor that anybody can buy, and they had rifles that anybody can buy. So this led to this escalation that was very obvious. Police departments started trying to say, we cannot have this type of thing happening in our city. I mean, to me, that if that would have happened in Baltimore, I would have been incredibly embarrassed. So I imagined that every chief around the nation wanted to avoid that embarrassment. And that's when you start seeing patrol rifles come in. You start seeing armored vehicles start to take more precedent. And then as they get stronger, people have a right to be stronger. And then the police respond to be stronger, but then the people have a constitutional right to be stronger. And then we just get into this escalation. So this escalation is a big issue of it. When I checked out Google Trends, which is when people are aware of it, this spiked dramatically in 2014. In 2014, we had Ferguson. And the response in Ferguson is really what got militarized police on the conversation of the average person, talking about how this was obviously unnecessary, things shouldn't be like this. They saw armored vehicles rolling down the streets in Ferguson, and it looks terrible. It looks terrible to see police officers looking like soldiers. And I don't know how you get past that visual. I mean, it looks bad to me. It's not something I'd want to see in my city. But, I mean, what are these guys supposed to do? I mean, even if you think about protecting the public, what if during one of these protests where there's 10,000 people out there, if one crazy person with moderate skill, and let's take a side note on the moderate skill thing for a second, we have to be very concerned, and I imagine every police department is very concerned that someone trained will do this one day. This has never happened. People like Timothy McVeigh were not really trained. There was a lot of hype in the around the media about the Dallas shooting. For some reason, I can't recall. Micah Johnson, that's the suspect's name. So he killed 3 cops and shot a couple other people in Dallas not too long ago. And when people were watching the video of it, they were like, look at this guy who's trained. Look at the way he's moving, and he's got his rifle. And I looked at that video, and I was like, haha, that guy is not remotely trained. You know, he has some familiarity with a weapon. Come to find out, he's a reservist. So Obviously, for an active duty Marine, I'm going to say this dude is not trained. And you could see those movements. And he single-handedly made a lot of noise and caused a lot of destruction to the point that the Dallas PD had to kill him with a robot and a bomb. They made a robot bomb to go kill this guy because he was virtually unstoppable just because he had a decent rifle and some body armor and barely knew how to shoot. You know, he was not moving like I would, like anybody I've ever seen highly trained he wouldn't move like that. So what are you going to do when you have tens of thousands, if not maybe 100,000 highly trained, incredibly dangerous people out there who have never done anything when it comes to mass shootings? They'll have domestic violence and stuff like that. They might kill one person, but they've never done one of these incidents. So even if, like, say one of those people were to go after the protesters in Ferguson, the police would be devastated and would have no ability to provide protection whatsoever. So even if they're trying to protect, they're completely outgunned, and then we can't really expect cops to respond to a high threat situation when they have the possibility of being entirely outgunned and devastated immediately because of the force of a regular citizen. That is a huge conundrum that I don't really know what to do with it. And I think there's a huge slippery slope, and I can't point to you the right answer. As an individual, I'm always going to be against the use of state violence. But I mean, this is a tough one. So let's talk real quick about why this occurs in the third aspect, which is how are they getting the vehicles? These are extremely expensive, and so why are they doing it? Well, the Pentagon started a program where they started using their excess equipment and selling it to regular police departments. So I have an article that I'm going to put up on the screen for everybody to look at, and we'll see the pictures of them in MRAPs, which are mobile armored, I don't remember what it is, but it's just a mobile vehicle that's armored. And that's really all the cops have. There's no weapons on the vehicle. It's just an armored personnel carrier. And but it's a military armored personnel character versus a vehicle, which, you know, the president rides in an armored personnel carrier. It's just like a Cadillac or something like that. So I mean, there are these equipments that we've already made through what is not a good thing in the military and our huge military industrial complex. I get all that, but these vehicles are just sitting there. And so why would an agency want to spend tons of money for something like that when they can essentially get it for free from the federal government? And in this article, we'll give an example of how it gets a little silly, and I'll just start the beginning of it off real quick so you guys can see. The high plains and rugged mountains of Wyoming aren't exactly synonymous with high crime rates or modern warfare, much less the kinds of mass protests currently roiling the country. But police agencies in the sparsely populated state have been arming themselves to the teeth in recent years. Just 80,000 people reside in sprawling Natrona County, home of the city of Casper. Yet the county sheriff's office has scored 3 military-style armored vehicles. I like how they say that, military-style armored trucks, since 1997, worth a combined $195,000 plus a $126,000 cargo carrier. The sheriff's office in nearby Campbell County, which has just 48,000 residents, helped itself to a $658,000 mine-resistant ambush patrol vehicle. There's an MRAP acronym for you, mine-resistant ambush patrol vehicle, in 2013, and a $733,000 version in the following year. In the capital city of Cheyenne, police ordered a pair of MRAPs worth a combined $1.42 million. And all of this has been virtually free, courtesy of the U.S. Department of Defense and its 1033 program, which has given law enforcement agencies across the country access to a huge array of surplus military weapons, equipment, and reportedly more than 13,000 MRAP vehicles, many of which have been seen driving on city streets recently as police confront those protesting the death of George Floyd in police custody. So for more details, go ahead and pull that article up and get all into the details. But we have a federal program that gives the vehicles to police departments for free. And I think the pathway to where we are with militarized police or militarized equipment it isn't. Let's just say it's understandable, and nobody, like very small minority, is actually looking at this and questioning it. Do we really want this to happen? There are sheriffs doing this, and so sheriff can just be voted out of office and or can be recalled, and you can just elect a different sheriff the next time who says he's not going to do these things. So that just leads me to believe that largely most people believe that this is okay. And maybe I do. I don't have a strong opinion on this because I feel like the progression in how we got here is rather clear. So it's not like we're dealing with a myth, like the black male being violent because they're black males is a myth. So that's a problem when we have that going around. Now, police departments are armed with military-style weapons and vehicles because they've been outgunned, and the public needs to be protected, and they're free from the feds. So, I mean, where do we place any blame?
Clear about violence begetting more violence.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I guess we could say empirically, the thing like the LA North Hollywood shootout is extremely rare. So why would we respond to an extremely rare situation like with car stops? I mean, I argue the perspective from police when they say there's no such thing as a routine car stop. I'm like, well, bro, like 99.999% of car stops end the exact same way. That sounds pretty routine. And car stops go bad way more often than somebody comes out blatantly outgunning the police. So statistically, I will concede that it doesn't make sense. But understanding human psychology, I don't know how to disrupt the process. And that's all I got to say about that. What do you think?
Oh, man. It's one of those things that I honestly, I understood why they're getting more equipment and all. I understood that. And I understand that, it's about for these statistically rare occurrences. What's strange to me is that I've read about different jurisdictions or towns or whatever where they have like they've spent an inordinate amount of money on equipment that basically sits and collects dust. And it's just strange to me, like, why put your money there when the likelihood of you needing that amount of equipment it's just so unlikely. It's bizarre to me. Like, what exactly are you so afraid of happening?
Yeah, I find that to be an impossible place to argue against. Yeah, I mean, why would they need all these things? What is in, and it's just, we as human beings are really gripped by fear.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for one, what place do I have to say that their fear isn't justified? And then how do we deal with the reality that when you give boys toys, they play with them? And I think that's a problem. I think if I would have had a armored vehicle, I would have totally played with that thing, And so it's a good thing that Baltimore doesn't really have them, which is always strange. There are so many things that are unique about Baltimore. We have SWAT has an armored personnel carrier, but even they don't use it unless they're being called out to something active. They still go just regular cars. So for big cities, I guess if having them stored somewhere and like maintained is fine. But I really wonder about far suburban areas. I mean, they always have the deal too, like how they can't expect Chicago to respond way out to some place in the county to help them if they're the ones that are outgunned. But I mean, maybe you just let the people go and you use detective work to get them. Why do you have to engage? It's kind of like I was saying about the
thing. Like, why do we have to do it this way?
right.
Why do you fight fire with fire every time out? Why can't you fight smarter instead of harder?
Right. And I can know right now that if I would have been the patrol officer who responded first to the North Hollywood shootout, I would not have engaged two dudes coming out of a bank that were wearing level 3, level 4, it had to be at least level 4 armor, probably level 4A. They probably had steel plates on their steel plates. I mean, that's how many shots they were taking. So those guys, I just wouldn't have engaged them. I would have turned around and got the fuck out of there because I just did not have the equipment or a tactical advantage whatsoever to be dealing with this. What would have happened if the LAPD pulled back, or it's probably Hollywood PD because they're actually different cities, but anyway, if they would have pulled back and just let them get in their car, get the tag of the car, get the description of the car, hope that you can kind of stay back and watch them and get the helicopter up. Because once the helicopter finds you, you're toast. It's just generally the way it works. And wait until there was some way to have a tactical advantage. If they start shooting the public, I get it that you have to respond immediately. But if their only enemy is the police, then why don't you just wait to a smarter time? And maybe that's just too much to ask of the average person or the average officer who gets into these situations. As we get more into this stuff and we talk about fear, you know, I go over this all the time. That I think the vast majority of people respond in either fight, flight, or freeze. And we don't want either three of those responses happening in these type of situations. I would say that those cops responded with fight, which is a not intelligent fight. When you're saying fight as a response, it's not a logical fight. It's just fighting, and most likely fighting, as in this case, in a scenario where you're clearly going to lose. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the police have to win every battle, and I think detective work will almost always result in better outcomes than the instant response of violence. When the public is targeted, I feel like you have to immediately bring down all the force that you possibly can to crush out whatever that thing is threatening the public immediately. But if the enemy is the police, I don't know why we wouldn't think more clearly in those situations, like the North Hollywood shootout. They weren't shooting anybody else, they were just shooting cops. So, I mean, why be there? Why put yourself in that role? And it's the same thing with people we'll talk about with rioting. I mean, I've been to some protests where really nothing was happening, and then the police rolled up in riot gear, and it kind of starts to set the tone.
Right.
I don't necessarily blame the police for taking that response, but it's like, look what is happening. You know, 'cause one day it's going to go bad. They don't respond. So then bad things going to happen. So then they get stuck in that cycle. I don't know.
It's like you can talk about, like, if your only tool to respond is violence,
guess what you
what
get?
do you expect to happen? Yeah.
Violence. You know, it's going to be violence.
Some
Totally.
are going to have to take a smarter tactic if you want to change anything.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just going to keep getting brutalized for really no reason, just because I'm not smart enough to think of a better way. So, hey, let's fight. That's essentially what's happening.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make sense. And you know, it's the sort of thing that gets people angry, and they look for different reasons that these things happen. When really, it's most of the time it doesn't seem to go any further. As far as the reason it happened, doesn't really seem to go further than I don't really have any other tools to work with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's just a shame.
Yeah, I mean that is a common issue with policing, and I felt the same way all the time. Especially, I was somebody that did not like to use pepper spray or carry a baton. So it was either you were almost either going to get my hands, and I did not carry a taser. I'm sorry, those things don't work. But you either get in my hands or the gun, and that's all I had. So one reason why I was very reluctant to ever pull my weapon was because I had to make that decision that there was no going back. Once that weapon was out, if somebody attacks me when my gun is in hand, I have no other option other than to pull the trigger. If my gun is safely holstered, I can probably think of some other things. So, I mean, these things do get very nuanced, and it seems like, oh, well, we should give police more tools, but then can we really handle more tools? It's kind of why I think I've switched to a more philosophical approach. Then I don't want to get all involved in police tactics. I want to get involved in minimizing police as we know them, as the state violence, the armed police officer who's out there enforcing, as in minimizing the public's exposure to that element. I don't think it can be gotten rid of. I think it's a necessary evil, but we should always be minimizing that interaction, minimize the armored vehicles, minimize the rifles, minimize the handguns. Don't provide more tools to provide violence in a way that becomes publicly acceptable, if that makes sense.
Talked before about not sending armed police to non-violent situations. To me, that seems like the most sensible thing.
You would think.
It's more like sending just a rational thinking adult with the ability that if you don't want to listen to reason, cool, all right, I'm just going to call in the guys with guns and now you have to get arrested and go to jail. But hey, if you will just listen, knock it off, go home, whatever, whatever the situation is, just dial it down peacefully. Nobody has to go to jail. Nobody has to risk getting shot. I feel like, why isn't that just how we approach these things? Because when you send somebody in with violence, now they're scared. The person carrying the gun is scared. The person that you called the police on, they're scared. And you're just, the likelihood of something going bad just skyrockets.
It skyrockets dramatically, absolutely. And I think we can see clearly why this is called for. If you just look around at anybody who feels like they've been a victim, the first thing they do is ask for the state to come in and execute violence on their behalf. It doesn't, you can watch every single politician out there. Right now, the left is calling for more police and locking people up and doing more, and Patriot Act 2.0, calling people domestic terrorists for a protest that goes too far. And then, just last year or whatever, you get the thing, and the other side says the same exact thing. It's extremely, at least American human nature, to call for that violence when we feel victimized. And the state just seems to be more than happy to oblige.
Well, and the other thing too is, I know we talked about getting to it at some point, but just briefly, there's money in it. There's money in locking people up.
There's money for the cop. There's money for the mayor. There's money for the commanders who are collecting the stats and getting promoted. There's money for the prison guards. There's money for the people building the prisons. And one of my big objections, we'll wrap this episode up in a second, but one of my big objections to the idea that we shouldn't have private prisons is that like 90% of everything in even a state prison is vendors providing beds, toiletries, food, all the same things. Literally, when you're arguing about a private prison being bad, you're just upset about the name on the building. That's it. All the same interests are involved. You're only cutting out one middleman, and that's the building owner. That is it. Everything else is exactly the same. So just, putting an elected or non-elected official that's a government-based in charge of the building where you've been keeping humans, and we got into this situation to begin with, doesn't at all ever seem to be a reasonable answer. I'm not saying I'm for private prisons, But the argument against them is super weak once you start thinking about what you're actually saying, and that's just the name on the building.
Oh, that's just depressing.
Well, I mean, think about it. If you make bunk beds that are made out of metal, don't you want
Yeah.
a bunch of prisons buying beds?